Good evening, everyone. I wanted to welcome you to our event this evening. My name is Siobhan McMenemy. I'm the senior editor at Wilfrid Laurier University Press. And we're delighted to have you here for our celebration of Sherrill Grace's publication, the much anticipated biography, Tiff, A Life of Timothy Findley. Tonight, we'll have the pleasure of listening to a conversation between two people with striking commitment to the related work of research, writing, editing, and publishing. Author Sherrill Grace is an internationally celebrated scholar of Canadian literature and art. Her work on Timothy Findley's life and writing is the latest in an impressive list of over 19 books, including a biography of playwright Sharon Pollock, a 2-volume edition of Malcolm Lowry's letters, and an examination of the influence of Tom Thomson's life and work on the Canadian imagination. Sherrill's commitment to life writing and literary criticism guided her through more than a decade of work among Findley's archives and within the pages of his writing, culminating in the publication of Tiff, which immediately garnered praise for its enthralling exploration of one of Canada's celebrated writers. Speaking with Professor Grace tonight will be Kel Pero, who is an editor, a writer, and a translator, and who also has a professional tie, as it happens, to the Stratford Festival, where she is a public lecturer and contributor of essays on Shakespearean drama to the festival's programs. Speaking personally, it has been a real wonder to see Sherrill's groundbreaking biography take shape over time, to witness the biographer at work, and to be privy to the ways she's developed her ideas about her subject and devised ways to tell the story of his life. This evening, we're here on Zoom, as you all know, and so we would like to invite you to feel free to pose questions to Sherrill over the course of the evening, which you can do in the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of the screen. And we will field those questions at the end of the session. In anticipation of learning still more about the relationship between the biographer and her subject, I'm pleased to hand over the microphone now to Kel Pero and Sherrill Grace. Welcome to Sherrill Grace first, who will be giving us a reading from the book, and then Kel and Sherrill, who will join us in conversation.
Thank you, Siobhan. Are we functioning? Waiting to hear.
Over to you, Sherrill.
Okay, here I am, and thank you, Siobhan, for that lovely introduction. Can I be heard? That's the first thing I want to know. Will somebody tell me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Maya. We're good to go, and I want to add my thanks to the audience. This is an unusual format for all of us, but it doesn't mean we can't get together across the country. And indeed, I have colleagues in Europe, I think, who are trying to tune in. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the people who shared their tips with me. They're acknowledged in the book, and you know who you are, so God bless you. And I want to also, before I read, mention the person who made so much of what Findley wrote and my biography of Findley possible, and that's the late Bill Whitehead, a wonderful man who I miss and to whom the book is dedicated. There's one more thank you. And this one is a special thank you to the stage manager. The stage manager in a theater or in a production tends to be forgotten and overlooked. They're not dragged out on the stage to get applause. They should be. They're wonderful people. And in my case, that wonderful person is Claire Hitchens at the press, Wilfrid Laurier University Press. Claire has held my technophobic hand through many things and through more to come. So here's to Claire. Thank you, Claire. Please, if you can click on and nod your head. If not, then I'll let you be in peace. And what I'd like to do now is set the stage very briefly for the conversation that will follow by reading just a couple of passages from the introduction to the biography, which is called Remembering Timothy Findley. In his review of Otto Frederick's biography of Glenn Gould, Findley wrote something that has remained at the back of my mind while writing this book. He warned that, quote, the creation of any successful biography involves, of necessity, encounters with any number of nightmares for a writer. Facts that cannot be verified. People you need to interview who die 2 days before you arrive. Intransigent keepers of the flame who refuse to divulge the one vital thing you must have access to. Findley could scarcely have summarized the hurdles a biographer faces more succinctly. Other writers have made similar comments and warned against a biographer trusting their subjects' duplicities, or the faulty memories of well-intentioned friends, or the skewed perspective of enemies. And the frustration of arriving after a key person has died or finding that vital information has been lost or destroyed. But not all writers are as interested in autobiography and biography as Findley was, as skilled at creating fictional biographers and autobiographies as he was, and as insistent that memory, whether faulty or not, is fundamental to human identity and survival. Moreover, Timothy Findley understood the slipperiness of life stories and made telling the difference between truth and lies a major theme in his fiction. Perhaps my most fascinating challenge, I would not call it a nightmare, has been the existence of so many volumes of private journals. There are thousands of pages of autographed journals, as well as diaries, annotated calendars, and workbooks in the Timothy Findley William Whitehead Fund, housed in Library and Archives Canada. From 1950 until very shortly before his death, he kept journals, wrote in them constantly and at considerable length, and carefully preserved them. They were important sources of information for him, and when he was away from Stone Orchard, he took photocopies of journal material that he needed to consult for works in progress. These journals have been invaluable for my research, and I have no doubt that Findley preserved them in part so that his biographer could use them. But therein rests my challenge. How much should I rely on them, and how complete are they? Timothy Findley, the man and the artist, placed enormous weight on journals as a genre. In his early journals, one can follow his almost daily battle with loneliness, even when he realized the necessity for being alone as he wrestled with the blank page. Reading these journals enables one to watch him, rather like a voyeur, slowly and hesitantly at first, yet surely discover his identity as a writer. They then show him struggling, sometimes with excitement, sometimes with crushing self-doubt, but always with passion, to find his characters, their story, and the exact word or phrase he needs. His journals became a companion of sorts, a safe place for describing his ambitions and expressing his self-doubt and despair. And he delighted in creating fictional journals and diaries for his characters and fictional biographers. They also provide an irresistible thread to follow through the daunting maze of Timothy Findley's life.
Well, thank you very much, Sherrill, for giving us that glimpse into this, as Siobhan said, long-awaited book that took you really a decade to write, didn't it? To gather everything and to write the story that you wanted to write. So this is a tremendous work in the long line of publications that you have. And you're talking, pardon me, For those just joining us, by the way, welcome to the virtual book launch for Tiff, A Life of Timothy Findley by Sherrill Grace. And Sherrill, you were talking about journals and the kind of, in a sense, how daunting it was to deal with somebody who wrote and kept so many journals. And of course, there's something particularly intimate about dealing with the archive of a person when you're writing about them. Particularly, I think, if you didn't know them in life. Are there any things you want to tell us about working in Timothy Findley's archive? Did you discover something that nobody had written about before? Or do you have any anecdotes of that sort? Because that's, I think, of interest to a lot of people. A lot of us don't get to do that kind of thing.
His journals are fascinating. They're voluminous, so that the actual work was exhausting. And our Library Archives Canada wasn't the only archive I visited. I visited many others, so I had other adventures in other archives. But if we're thinking only of the journals, they are in the collection at Library Archives Canada in Ottawa, in the restricted reading room, which is where you have to read them, which means, again, you need permission. And that's the permission that I got, unqualified, absolute access to everything from Bill Whitehead. And without that kind of access, one cannot do this kind of research. And biographers have faced absolute brick walls when family members refuse. These journals are absolutely amazing. And I hope now that other people will get permission to go and work with them in the future on so many aspects of Findley's work. So I hope they open up the work and the curiosity about the work as well. He talked to himself in these journals when he was alone. He had a need which appeared in the very first little journal he kept as a teenager, that first one that survived, to describe things. It's absolutely fascinating. He lived through words even as a kid when he couldn't articulate why he was living through words. But it's clear that he reveled in language. And he was always observing things, even as a kid, and then writing down what he observed. As he goes older and he goes more self-conscious and more aware of who he is and what he wants to do with his life, he starts deliberately recording experiences, facts, dates, names, events, where he's been, what he thought of this exhibition or that film or that play or that piece of music. He was a devotee of many kinds of classical music. And then you see, once he gets the firm grasp on who he's going to be, and he's going to be a writer, you see him practicing dialogue and scenes, and then you see him at times in utter despair. And this is something that I've seen it before with other archives, particularly with Malcolm Lowry's archives, but it was very moving. I'm two people when I do that kind of thing. I have to be cold, objective, and I have to work like hell. So there's nothing subjective about that. You just have to, this is a job, right? The taxpayer is paying me to live in Ottawa and do this work. So I do this work, whatever. However, there are moments when, and there were many moments with Tiff, but the one I'm thinking of as I speak with you, Kel, is a moment in the 1950s, and he was in absolute despair about his acting career and his writing, and what he would be, and his identity crisis. Was he going to act? Was he going to write? And he attacks the page. And you can see it, you can feel it. It's a creepy thing. But the paper of the page is slightly torn and indented after all these years still. So when you put your finger on that, that he goes through the page, you can feel the frustration, the anger, frustration, I guess, is the best word, that he cannot be what he wants to be, that he's failed, the writing is horrible, the acting, he's been told his acting is horrible, and he calls on God, and God doesn't help him. He went through a kind of God stage in those years before he rejected any kind of organized religion or organized God of his parents. So it's very, very interesting to see that, very moving to see that kind of on the page. The journals served also as a kind of mirror for him. There's a real sense in which he never stopped acting and performing, is the term I use in the book. And I can see him performing in these journals. So it's full of information, it's full of personality, it's full of a sense of adventure and awe when he sees a play he likes, and he writes about in great detail, or a piece of music, and he writes about in great detail. It's amazing how much he understood about music, because he was never trained. He left school in grade 10, something he regretted all his life. But he was one smart dude, and he writes absolutely fascinating things as well as despairing things in those journals. So they're
he also played piano, did he? Is that right? He played piano.
The piano. He never was trained to play the piano, but he played the piano for relaxation. The pianos were of enormous importance to him, and he always had to have a piano in his life. So when he was having to be on the road to act in England as a young man, and often staying in pretty ghastly digs, when he landed upon a residence for the actors where the lady had a piano, and he could have a hot bath and play the piano, he was a happy guy. Pianos are going to play an important role in his fiction as well.
So he didn't just keep journals, he kept calendars as well, right? It seems he kept really all kinds of kind of ephemera from his life that clearly, as you say, went into his fiction. But do you think this was important? I'm thinking, for somebody, and you make this clear in the book, as you said, for somebody who had a good deal of self-doubt about what his gifts were, what he should be doing, whether he could be good at something he liked, etc. Do you feel that these things were part of making him feel real to himself, in essence? Or did they have more to do with the writing he wanted to do?
I think it's both, Kel. And it depends on his mood, and it depends at what stage in his life. But yeah, he talks, as I said at the outset here, he talks to himself in his journals, particularly the early journals, and they are a companion for him. I think his sense of identity was further reinforced by the records that he bought as soon as he had any money to buy them, the books that he bought as soon as he had any money to buy them, which he took with him, as well as his journals, photographs. The Findley family kept photographs. So he gets this propensity, if you will, honestly, from his family, both sides of his family. But they were talismans. Some of them were talismans. You'll be pleased to know that he had an Irish grandmother whom he adored. And she was, of course, raised a Roman Catholic and had given him her crucifix. And he was not religious, but he kept that with him. He traveled and kept it with him. It was one of the things Granny Bull came with him. So yeah, they gave him confidence. They reminded him of people he loved. They were part of who he was. There were a few other talismans that he kept with him as much as possible too. But yeah, he had to have these things around him. And the piano was one of them.
So when, you spent many years teaching as well as writing. And I know that you taught Findley's work. And what was it that first made you interested in him in a way that you started to explore and decided to write a biography? Because obviously any biography is a major undertaking, and we know this one certainly was. So tell us a bit about your path to that.
I think the real impetus, I had started reading Timothy Findley when the wars came out in 1977 and thought it was a fabulous novel. And so I did put it on some courses, not the big first year courses that we have at UBC, but at second year Canadian literature courses. And then as I became more interested later on, after I'd finished those Malcolm Lowry letters, which took years, I started to do quite a bit of work on the two world wars. Well, there and again, I come back to Findley's The Wars, the iconic, marvelous text, teaching that to more senior students. And I was impressed at that point with their ability to engage with that novel, that they would single it out in a course that had several novels on it. And that would be the one they wanted to write about or they wanted to ask about. And then I got to teaching graduate seminars. And that's when I think the other shoe dropped, as it were, because they were engaging with a book and with an author, not just the wars at this point with graduate students, but Famous Last Words and Not Wanted on the Voyage. They were engaging with a writer who seemed to mean a heck of a lot to them. They'd be people 23, 25, 27 in graduate school. And they were asking me questions for which I didn't have answers. And one thing leads to another, but when young people, when that's what you've done as your professional life is to teach and to do research, and young people are saying, what is it, and why this and why that, and where can we go for? You're getting the nudges, or I was getting the nudges I needed to engage with this subject. And then I finished a large book on landscapes of war and memory. Again, Findley plays a critical role in that. And one thing leads to another, and I decided, okay, let's look into this. Let's see if these young people are engaged now with the issues that this writer raised, a writer I think who's extremely important and writes very well, then he deserves more attention. And that's how it starts.
Now, what do you feel, because he's been dead for quite a while now, and of course he wrote, he's fairly prolific as a writer. What do you feel his particular contribution, if we can, that's always a bit reductive, but his contribution to Canadian literature that, should be perhaps appreciated more than it is, or that you feel is the major reason why, among what I'm sure are many, the major reason for reading Timothy Findley in 2020 and beyond?
I think there are several reasons that people should return to Timothy Findley. I mean, you're really asking me, why is Timothy Findley important today? He died in 2002. He was 71. He didn't reach his 72nd birthday. And fashions in reading have changed. They change. Of course they change. That's normal. That's natural. And in a way, I would say that he went out of fashion for a while. I rather think that a writer like Findley is going to be back in fashion for several reasons. One, he's just a damn good writer. Kel, he writes well. It's beautiful prose. In his best novels, I think they're really marvelous. He has a couple of plays that I think are extremely important and very well done. Some exquisitely fine short stories. And of course, some memoirs as well, which are lovely to read. So you've got a good writer here, number one. Somebody who really knows what they're doing with language and cares greatly about it. And that's timeless. You can always go back to that kind of a writer, no matter how many decades have passed, and enjoy the writing, the characters, the themes. The themes. Okay. In his work, he is addressing subjects that just don't go out of style. He took on big issues that he thought mattered. He speaks to us, I think, now by addressing these issues. And these issues are, and I'm only going to mention a few that I think are of particular urgent relevance today. What I would call a nature deficit in our culture, not just in Canada, but everywhere. I'm thinking about his contribution, what he would do if he were alive today and was reading or seeing things about what's happening in the Amazon. and what Bolsonaro is managing to get done to the Amazon. And he would be apoplectic about that. So our inability, our nature deficit, our inability to understand and connect with the natural world, with what he saw as the degradation of the planet. He was ahead of his time in speaking out about that and writing about those sorts of issues. And our passivity, what he would say or how we would analyze it, I really don't know, but I know he would be incensed, outraged, appalled by the general passivity in the face of these climate change. He would be a great fan of Greta Thunberg. And he would be speaking out in praise of her and in praise of anybody trying to address climate change, the destruction of our environment, the overwhelming pollution of our oceans. He cared deeply about these things. And so I think these are issues that speak to younger generations today. Other things that he would be important for, I think, today would be human rights in general, and what we still see as threats to human rights: censorship, homophobia, and certainly the destruction of nature and the pollution of the oceans with plastics and things horrified him. And so I think he has a lot to say about what matters and where we should be focusing our attention on our connections as with the natural world as part of that natural world, not separate from and superior to, and therefore in a position to exploit animals and nature. He would want us to speak out in defense of the environment, I think, and he did that in some of his writing.
I would say these are things that he actually did weave into his
he
fiction
weaved
as well.
it into his writing. I mean, look at Not Wanted on the Voyage. It's a passionate condemnation of the destruction, human destruction of nature, and the complete rejection of any connection with that world. The view that human beings, particularly the male of the species, is superior to everything else and can use and exploit it at will. That's a passionate condemnation of human behavior as he saw it. He didn't call himself an environmentalist. That's a term that came along rather later. But I would think of him in those terms, absolutely, yeah. That we need to remember and be humble in the face of, that we're part of, that we're destroying ourselves as we destroy the rest of the world, kind of thing. That runs right through his work, right to his last major novel, Pilgrim.
Now, these are, as you say, these are very great passions. These are very strong convictions. For somebody who, one is really struck in reading your biography that Findley was definitely somebody, as you said, who really did deal with some very, very dark nights of the soul. You mentioned the kind of motto against despair. That despair was in a sense, one gets the feeling that it was almost kind of you ran the risk of it being a default position if you didn't do something against it. What do you see as being kind of at the root of that? I know there are, familial matters. There are obviously the matters of living in, shall we say, a fallen world. But this was very, very strong with him, particularly when he was young, but really at many points in his life. Can you speak a bit about that? Why despair was so much at his heels so often?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely true. In fact, at one point I remember thinking of calling the biography Hope Against Despair or Against Despair. It was his motto. And he did continue to write that in his journals, and he wrote it in some of his letters, particularly letters to young people. Hope against despair, remember to, hope against despair, or on his journals when he, and later in life too, when he was struggling with some of his major works and getting nowhere with it, you'd find in the journals against despair, or even, and you asked me about some of the other documents he kept, like calendars and so on. He would write in the small space provided on a regular calendar with a dark pencil and capital letters, against despair, the death of something, at some critical thing that had happened in the news. So this motto, against despair, which comes from Samuel Johnson, he found that in the diaries of Johnson, at the very end of the last entry that Dr. Johnson wrote in his journal. Now, in the case of Johnson, it's a religious exedia. You don't give in to despair. And he found that, I believe, that saying when he was in the early 50s. And then it becomes part of his own personal faith, because he's going to abandon the Presbyterianism of his fathers for all sorts of reasons. Not wanted on the voyage explains that fairly clearly. But he retains this feeling that to despair, no matter how despairing things looked, was to give in, was to commit a sin. In his youth, he would have used the word sin. He doesn't talk about sin as an older man, but I think the residue of that stayed with him. So you don't give in. You fight against despair. You hold hope against despair. And I think in all of his work, you see him moving through, or taking his characters through despair to a position where somebody in the novel or the play or the story will articulate the need for hope, not necessarily using the words that Findley sometimes used in his letters, hope against despair, but you see them moving to that position, because it's the only position from which you can turn to imagination and creativity and reach out to the world. If you just sink into despair, then you're locked into a complete negative position.
Do you think, I got the impression too, and I may be reading too much into this, but obviously his brother was a very sad figure, and a figure who had a great impact on Findley. Do you think, I always got the sense of him thinking that was, in a sense, an embodiment of despair, very close to him and close to him in age, that, that could have been him. Do you think that his brother was a bit of a cautionary tale in this respect?
Oh, absolutely. I think you've put it very well. Michael is the brother's name, and who knows, for whatever reason, alcoholism is a disease, and it certainly ran in the family. Findley had to fight it himself, as you know. But the brother was an absolutely tormented, impossible person, from everything I can tell, from family letters, from letters that the father, Alan Findley, wrote to Tiff when Tiff was living in England, when he was an actor, about the state that Michael was in. Journal entries that Findley many journal entries about his brother and his struggles with his brother, and at times hating his brother and yet loving his brother and trying to help his brother, and seeing a cautionary tale for himself in Michael's fate, in his collapse. I mean, it really was a horrendous life.
Yes, once really, I found reading the book, I was really struck by that it's just... It
was a horrendous life. The man died a horrible death, and Findley had to go in and clean up the mess. And I do describe that in the book. It was a heartbreaking, impossible situation. He tried to help Michael, but could get nowhere, couldn't get through. The man needed to drink and drank himself to death.
To death, yes. You mentioned too, of course, when Tiff was living in England, this because I believe Michael lived in England for a time too, did he not?
Did.
He was,
Mhm.
yes, he was also there. Now, one of the really interesting things about Findley too is when you think of how many major figures of, you know, the 20th century kind of English cultural stage, that is English speaking, he intersected with people like Alec Guinness and Ruth Gordon. You know, that in itself would make his life really interesting enough to merit a biography, I think. But I know that he experienced frustration in his acting career. And of course, he worked with Tyrone Guthrie, first here in Stratford, right, very early on. But what was it ultimately that, because he did struggle with his writing a lot at first too, what was it that made him decide writing is the way to go? Acting, there's nothing I can do about the acting, or acting is not going to give me what I want. What would you say kind of set his path in terms of that?
That is, I think, a wonderful question, and it's one I do explore at some length. I hate to give it all away because I hope readers will.
No, of course, just a bit of a taste. You know?
Yeah, he was not happy acting for a whole range of reasons, but I think the one to single out is that he realized fairly early on that he did not have what it would take to be a great actor. And he was ambitious. He was very ambitious. And if he was only going to end up playing bit parts all his life, then to hell with that. And interestingly, he was always writing. At the same time, he was struggling with acting and moaning about getting bit parts in plays, and complaining in his journals in England, those early journals in England, about the horrors of his life. And he couldn't keep playing this role in Thornton Wilder's The Matchmaker. This was awful, blah, blah, blah. He's writing about it, and then he's also writing about other things that show beautiful capacity to write. The descriptions of an opera he's seen, or a play he's attended, or some other thing. And then, I'm not going to give it away, but the penny will drop that, wait a minute here, I'm having a good time doing this. And he starts to get encouragement for doing this from people like Thornton Wilder and Ruth Gordon, and even Alec Guinness. He starts to show some of his writing to these people. And they say, well, it's Thornton Wilder who says, Findley, you are a writer. Now he's still acting and he will continue to act, but that's for somebody, read the biography to find out.
See, that's what you see. If you read the biography, you'll learn more about that. That's what I wanted to put people on to. So just a couple of things that I'd like to discuss. And one is, of course, Bill Whitehead, and the tremendous importance of him to Findlay. And I know that you knew Bill. I knew Bill slightly. Bill was a lovely, charming man who just passed away a couple of years ago. Now, they had a long relationship that went through different phases. And I know that that you've said, Findlay needed to be taken care of and Bill needed someone to take care of. Would you say that, is that the essence of their relationship, or are there more things? This is always a mystery, of course. Never presume to know the secrets of a marriage, as the Browning version says. But do you want to say a bit about that relationship, because it was so important to him?
Those words, actually, I'm quoting from Bill. Tiff needed somebody to look after, and I needed to look after him, and I needed somebody to look after. I knew Bill fairly well. I remember going to his condo in Stratford in 2010, February 2010. I will never forget. I'd written ahead, told him that I had an interest in writing a biography of Timothy Findley. And would he meet with me? I would be in Toronto and then I could come to Stratford, da, 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 da. He said, yes, do come. And so the plan was set. He was interested in there being a biography of Timothy Findley. So I showed up at their apartment, and this was the apartment that in Stratford that Bill and Tiff had lived in the few years before Tiff died. And I came to the door, well, I came upstairs, the door was open, and there was this man, and he opens his arms, and he gives me a big hug. And the rest is history.
So he was
he was so welcoming. He was so positive. I had to lay it out. I said, this is what I will need. I will have to have clearance. I will have to have permissions. I'll have to have these things in writing. Anyway, we had a very jovial evening with a wonderful pear tort. He was a great cook, and fabulous red wine, of course, red wine. And here I am. He gave me written permission for complete access to anything I needed to see, whether restricted or not. And without that, I don't think one could do a biography of Timothy Findley. So much of the material you would need is unpublished, restricted. So there are practicalities here, and he was a very practical man, and he understood those. Yeah.
So he wanted this project to be done, and you came along, and he knew you were the person to do it. That's
right.
That's fantastic.
It was serendipity.
Just one last question before we. Oh, pardon me. I'm just going to ask you one last question before we go on to other people's questions, and that is simply, do you have any advice for biographers? Because obviously, being a biographer is a particular calling, and you've been a biographer for a number of people now. So what would you say to someone thinking of embarking on that?
I think you need to be very practical and very objective. And the temptation, of course, to be involved and get subjective is always there. But it's a practical undertaking. It takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, and a wide curiosity about other people who have something to tell you. And I owe a lot. Any biographer worth his or her salt owes a lot to the people who are willing to talk to you, who are willing to share their version of the person you're writing about with you. You take it with a grain of salt, of course. You have to weigh the evidence objectively. But these people are being wonderful, and they're being wonderfully helpful, and they're doing their best. And I met some of the most amazing and wonderful people in the process of doing the research for this biography. I also advise people to love archival work. I always have. I like going into an archive and looking at material. You have to like that. If you don't, then this isn't the kind of work you should do. So you need to be interested in talking to people. You need to be interested in archival work, and then you just need a lot of patience, because you have to explore. Things connect. Mm-hmm. And one thing will lead you here, one thing will lead you there. You'll suddenly find, oh dear, I have to go and talk to this person or that person, or I have to do this, that, or the other. You need funding.
And time.
You need research funding, and then you need to honor the contract that you've made with the people funding you. And so I've had some amazing adventures. You have to be willing to have adventures, to stick your neck out, to trespass. I've done some trespassing, Kel.
What?
And
Confessions of Sherrill Grace.
I live to tell the tale.
Well, thank you for all of that. Now, I know that we have some questions from people who have joined us this evening, and I'm just going to look here and let you know about them and see what you have to say. So, one is from let me see now. Actually, it's somebody was asking, which of your publications did you enjoy writing the most? which was the most challenging and why? So this is a slightly wider ranging question, but you've been a biographer again for quite a while. So tell us about that.
All right, there actually are two answers to that. And one, it doesn't really have much to do with biography. I think my early 20th century, 2000, and I keep forgetting the year that it came out, 2001, 2002 book, Canada and the Idea of North, was the one that is still resonating with me. I'm looking out my window to the north, Kel, as I reflect on this and on the person who's asked this question. Thank you. Early in my life, I became interested in northernness, of which Canada has a great deal. And I've traveled a lot in the northern parts of our provinces, in the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, and in the Arctic. So personal adventures of that kind, I will never forget. For me, they were life-changing, shaping, wonderful experiences because hearing Indigenous languages, seeing Indigenous communities, traveling in the footsteps of early explorers in this country, a lot of reading research as well, because it was an interdisciplinary book about music and art and theater and fiction and nonfiction. I actually think that was one of the most, for me, life-changing, informative adventures, research adventures.
And it's interesting because, of course, Findley also, I mean, he and Bill traveled through a great deal of Canada, including in the north, and he also found this.
Yeah, and so I understood exactly what he was talking about when he praises the Northwest Territories and in letters and in his journals, and he writes about the power of that experience and how much I've been in the Yukon, you know, I've been where he went and further north than he went. And so I do understand at a kind of visceral level how that could have mattered to him. That was a part of the traveling research I didn't have to do because I'd already done it, so to speak, and it lived with me. So that book, I treasure that book. And I treasure what I learned about being Canadian, about being a writer, and about our environment and our natural world in that book. When it comes to other things I've written, I don't know, one of the earlier biographical forays I made was into the life of Mina Benson Hubbard. Do you know Mina Benson Hubbard? Or I don't know who I'm speaking to who asked this wonderful question.
I must say.
She made a journey across Labrador in 1905, and she made the journey successfully. Her husband had died trying to do this in 1903. And so she put a team together at a time when women, just middle-class, educated women, were ladies and did not do such dreadful things. Yes. And she traveled with Dene and Indigenous people, and she crossed Labrador. And then she lived to write about it. And she published a book in 1908 called A Woman's Way Through Unknown Labrador. So it's not the whole story. I'm getting a long way from Timothy Findley, but I so enjoyed that. I ended up going to Labrador and working in archives, and again in Ottawa at Library Archives Canada, and bringing out a new edition of her 1908, A Woman's Way Through Unknown Labrador. It was so much fun.
We are going to ask another question. This is actually from Linda Hutchin, who says, thanks so much for a most moving and insightful biography of a great writer. Your wonderful choice of photos blew me away. Could you talk to us about your choice of photos? Because surely, given the physicality of the book, even in our digital age, your decision about what images to include must have been a challenge. I say this as a totally print-obsessed literary person. And we have more and more questions here, so I'll see how pointedly you can.
Okay, briefly, I did mention that Findley kept family albums, right? That he was obsessed with that. He kept them. He had all of them. His father had given them, his mother, etc. So they were part of his heritage, part of his growing up, part of his life. He put a great deal of emphasis on photographs. I have a huge number of digital photographs and actual photographs that Bill Whitehead gave me, and they will eventually go to an archive. I had to choose, and the press generously allowed me whatever it was they allowed me now. And it's a very, very interesting decision, because the decisions I made meant that I was constructing a visual image of Timothy Findley. And it was a construction. I was creating my own fiction from all of these images. They had to be ones that could be well reproduced. They had to be ones that would help tell the story. And they could only be, what is it, 35 that I have? So it was a terrible choice to have to make, but I think finally they do help to tell Findley's story. I hope they do, and I hope they're interesting and capture the many aspects of his life.
This is another matter of being practical, right? You always have to make some decisions that are going to be difficult of that sort. Now, we do have another question here. What role, if any, did he believed his sexuality played in his work? And what role do you, as his biographer, believe it played, if any?
That's a huge subject, and it's many faceted. He doesn't, in his writing, in much of his writing, write directly about homosexuality or being gay. But there are some occasions when he does, and to my mind, and this is my personal taste, this is not necessarily going to be somebody else's, I think the really most marvelous work in which he deals with this, the importance of this, and the legacies of this, is in his play, The Stillborn Lover. I so hope that play will be remounted. It's not just about being gay. It's about many other things, but boy, does it go to the heart and dramatize that dilemma in Cold War politics in Canada. And it's a beautifully constructed play. It's a tremendously moving play. It's classical, and that's what I want. I want to see The Stillborn Lover back on the boards. And I hope somebody out there listening is going to work in the theater and get that play up and running. In his life, it was very important. And he was rejected by his father. And that hurt him, in my view, all his life, even though Alan Findley would, in his later years, come to appreciate his son and to be very, very proud of Findley's accomplishments. He had wounded Findley as a child, as a teenager, particularly as a teenager. Very vulnerable years. And once that trauma and that injury, that wound had occurred, it's there for life. And it was there for life for Timothy Findley. And I discussed it not at great lengths, but throughout the book, because it's important. And
well, and his father was an enormously self-absorbed man. One definitely gets that sense. I mean, it's just, one hardly believes some of the things that he did that he seemed to think were okay. Because Findley's mother would wait, right? She would be there.
But he was of his time and place. You know, Alan Findley was of his time and place. And he was in the Air Force in the Second World War. And, you know, the homophobia was everywhere at every level. And it was certainly in the armed forces, and it was certainly in the Findley branch of the family. And his son being gay meant that his son had failed the image of masculinity. It's still with us. It hasn't gone away, but God knows it hasn't gone away. But
well, we've just got a couple more questions here. I wonder if you could speak about how much the biographer should or should not reveal in terms of what they discover regarding archival research. Is there a moment when the biographer must draw the line and leave material aside? How do you feel about that?
That is, of course, a marvelous question. The simple answer is yes. But you'd like, you'd like me to say a little bit more.
Well, what would you say, kind of, we just have a few minutes left here, but what would you say generally, or it's kind of the line there?
In my view, and I think biographers generally would share this, I hope they would, you have to accept the reality that there are things you will never know, that you cannot know for sure. Idle speculation on any aspect of another person's life is just that, idle. And I think I would refer this person asking this question, or anybody listening, to something that I love. And I happen to have it to hand, Kel, so I'm going to address it. In a recent book by the wonderful Julian Barnes called The Man in the Red Coat, Barnes said something that I read this book quite a while ago that I just cheered over, and it's this. Barnes says, "We cannot know. If used sparingly, this is one of the strongest phrases in the biographer's language." I couldn't agree more. And he goes on, "It reminds us that the suave study of life we are reading, for all its detail, length, and footnotes, for all its factual certainties and confident hypotheses, can only be a public version of a public life and a partial version of a private life." Amen.
There's the question right there. So, and this discretion is obviously part of what a biographer has to exercise as he or she goes on. Now, I think we have time for one more. This is a fairly quick one. Did you come across people he knew, that is Findley knew, who did not want to share their thoughts and remembrances with you because of how fiercely he protected his privacy?
Yes, I did. And that has to be respected when you're writing a biography. One of those people was the late Robin Phillips.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yes, who you will know. And Phillips had actually worked with Tiff on the film version of The Wars and had directed that. I think that I've seen the film. It should be out there. It is beautifully well done, but that's a whole backstory that has nothing to do with Findley really, or with Robin Phillips. But I wasn't able to get through to him. He would not speak with me. There is another fellow I wasn't able to speak to. But even the wonderful Alec McCowan, with whom I did speak and meet in person, the late Alec McCowan, now the British actor, there were all sorts of things he was willing to talk about. We had wonderful letters, communications, person-to-person interview when I was in London, England. But then there was a subject he would not address. He just would not go there, and that was that. You have to respect that.
Of course,
people
yes.
are giving you their time, yeah, and you respect when they say no, and you have to respect it, or at least I felt I did, and I've always tried to do that.
And the final question is, it said, "My question is simple. How does it feel to have this wonderful book done?"
Oh my God. How does it feel? I'm holding it. How does it feel? I think the press did a beautiful job. That is, as a book, right? It's a beautiful job. All praise to them. And the quality of the paper, of the font, of the cover, of the design, of the way the illustrations have been included. I think if Bill were alive, I think he would be thrilled. He did read a penultimate version of the text. That's another story. But it feels good. It feels odd. I don't feel over, if you like it. I'm still living with it, of course. But I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the way it looks. I'm really pleased with the way it's been received. I'm delighted to pick it up and read a bit of it. My husband is reading it now and enjoying it. My sister has just read it. She was thrilled with it and over the moon with questions. Well, this is good. This is good. This is good. So privately, I'm very, very pleased.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. And I would like to thank you and thank everybody who joined us this evening for the launch of Tiff, if you want, do you want to hold it up there, Sherrill, so that we can,
Here we
you can
are.
see it, and it is a beautiful objet. There it is, Tiff. And thank you, everybody. And please go out and buy the book, read it. It is a great read, fascinating Life of a Fascinating Man. So thank you very much. And
Thank
with
you.
that,
Thank you.
I believe we will conclude.
I'd like to thank,
Siobhan?
before we totally wrap up the evening, I'd like to conclude by thanking both of you, Kel and Sherrill. The conversation, as always, has been lively and entertaining and thoughtful. I have no doubt that the people who have attended this fine launch have enjoyed themselves. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who did show up. We were delighted to host you. Thanks to my colleagues, Claire and Maya. And on behalf of the press, have a good evening.